All right, welcome back. The reason we call this Rick Corey Sports Special is because it's not just sports, it's many other things. I mean, yeah, the Final Four is going on and all that. But we have more important things to talk about, and that's life in general, and nobody does that better than my friend right there, Jim Stovall. How you doing, my friend?
I am blessed and highly favored. How are you, Rick Corey?
Well, I am blessed and favored by you, just knowing you. I mean, Jim is a guy who, if you know Jim, he'll send out once every 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks, whatever it is. You'll get a nice note from Jim just saying he's thinking of you, and always saying stay in touch. And I've always appreciated that. Jim and I have done these kinds of interviews many times before. But with this opportunity here at Groovy 105.7, I wanted to make sure that we redo it because I want this show to be about Tulsa. I want it to be about people. I want it to be about your life. And that's what Jim writes about. And as a matter of fact, I got one of your columns this morning that really struck close to home for me. And we're going to visit about those columns, but we're going to also just talk about tips and things for life from Jim. But this morning's I thought was really interesting because I'm a rules guy. I'm a rules follower. I have rules. I think they're important. Explain what you wrote about this morning.
Well, what we're talking about is rules to live by. And a lot of people, I have the Stovall Center for Entrepreneurship at ORU, and we train kids from all around the world who are getting their degrees and becoming an entrepreneur. And I have to dispel them of the notion that I can have my own business and I don't have to have any rules. No, you will have more rules, and we all live by rules. If you don't set your own, someone else will put them on you. And I like to have my own rules. And every mega successful person I've ever met, the top people in every field, man, they have rules for everything. And it's just a standard because you don't want to be making decisions in the critical moment. I did several events years ago in arena events with Colin Powell. And he and I went and did a thing at a military base for officers and hundreds of officers. And I said, now, General Powell, how do you teach them good decision making? And he said, we're in the military. We don't make decisions. We follow orders and we react to situations that we've been trained. And Rick, you've seen great athletes. I mean, you don't want these people thinking. You want them, when he does this, you do this. You don't think about it, you move. Well, success is very much that way. And, and the more pressure you get under, the more it matters. For my movies, I've had the opportunity to be in an operating room while they're doing a procedure on someone. And it's amazing when the horn goes off and they have flatline and it's code blue. And, I would be panicking and everybody goes immediately calm. They bring out the checklist and they start going through it. Pilots do the same thing. And I'm sure you work with divers and you work with the last thing you want to do when you're down there is panic. When this happens, you need to know exactly what you do. Just relax, and this is what you do. So that's where I think rules come into our life.
They do. And I like your point about if you don't set them, somebody will for you. And especially, as you mentioned, if you're a small business owner, and I am, you find yourself wading knee deep. And sometimes, and here's the hard part, Jim, and I want your advice on this. You've got people you want to keep close and you want to be nice to people, but you have to occasionally be the boss. That is a very delicate situation with some egos, but you still have to do that. You just have to find the right way. How do you approach it?
Well, with my colleagues here, uh, I always tell them, you guys know what to do. Please don't make me be the boss. And a number of years ago, I was picked by the Wall Street Journal and the EEOC in Washington as the Entrepreneur of the Year. And the Journal sent a guy here to mirror me for a week. And at the end of the week, I do not believe it was a compliment. He said, Jim, I've followed you all week and you've talked to all your people. And if I didn't know you were the boss, I would not think you're in charge here. And I said, thank you very much. I go around every day. How's it going? What do you need? What's your number one priority? How can I help? Those are the big things. And please don't make me be the boss. I don't want to be the boss. And then when you're outside of your own organization, one of the most powerful concepts I love to share with people is we become like the five people we hang around with the most. And as soon as I heard that and started realizing it's true, I had to upgrade my circle there, because wow, I had some people hanging around. And I'm not saying you cut people out of your life, you don't, but there are times. Last year, I had a goal to write 2 books, and I ended up writing 6 in a very intense process. And there are certain people who are acquaintances of mine, when I hear from, hey, I'm under a deadline, I'll get back with you, and they'll hear from me at the end. But you really, it's like game time, Rick. You really got to focus. And there's some people you just can't be around. There are people in our lives, everybody we know, they either make an emotional deposit in our account or they make an emotional withdrawal. There are people I'm around, I can be exhausted, spent, burnt out, and I spend a few minutes with them and I'm ready to go again. There are other people, man, after a few minutes with them, I need to take a shower and lay down and get a nap. I mean, they just want me out. And, we need to recognize those people in our lives and act accordingly.
And the accordingly part is the hard part, though, Jim, because as you said, you might not cut somebody out of your life, but you might have to say some things you don't necessarily know or want to say because you don't want that confrontation, and that's not easy.
Oh yeah, I mean, tough love is a difficult thing, and my grandfather was one of the wisest men I ever knew, and he always said that most people don't want your opinion, even some of them that asked for it, and it's true. And I was thinking of him this morning because he would be ecstatic that I'm on once again with Rick Corey because late in his life, he was in his 90s. We moved him here to Tulsa, and I came into his room and he was listening to the radio, and I said, "What you listening to?" He said, "Oh, they got that crazy guy that does weird things to help the kids." Well, that was you. And I thought, there's a whole lot worse things you can say about somebody than they're the crazy guy that does weird things to help kids. Because, I do TV for blind people and I write books I can't read that are turned into movies I can't watch. I understand being out of the mainstream.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. What Jim's referring to are the fundraisers I did for Operation Aware. We raised about $1.3 million over 28 years of doing things like painting the Golden Driller, staying underwater 12 hours a day at a YMCA, writing Zingo 542 times, those kinds of things back when Zingo was still around. You mentioned books and movies. You've certainly had a tremendous career there. Nothing put you on the map quite like The Notebook. Describe the writing of that and how that came about.
Well, the ultimate gift was the film that we got James Garner to do right after he did The Notebook. And the ultimate gift is that was my first novel. I never intended to be a writer. I, I invented this system so that blind people like me, 13 million blind people, could access movies and television. And we got an Emmy Award for our first season on national television. And because of that, I was asked to speak at the National Association of Broadcasters for their annual convention. And at the end of that speech, three separate people came over to my assistant and said, "We want him for our convention." And the next thing I know, I'm an arena speaker. And I'm doing this West Coast tour with Dr. Robert Schuller and Dr. Dennis Whaley. And the two of them twisted my arm to write a book. So, I was backstage and Dr. Schuller approached me with that Dr. Schuller voice. And I firmly believe that's how God talks. He says, "My friend Jim, I believe you should write a book." I said, "Hey, I can't read a book. Why should I write a book now? I'm not interested. Thank you." And it was my time to go do an hour out in the arena. So I went out, did my hour. When I came off stage, Dr. Whately standing there. He said, "Hey, while you were out there, we got it all worked out." I honestly thought they meant the ground transportation to the plane. I said, "What'd you boys work out?" And he said, "Well, while you were out there, Schuller called his publisher over at Thomas Nelson. I agreed to write the foreword, and we need your manuscript in about 90 days. And that's how I became an author. And I went back and wrote my story of becoming blind and losing my football career and becoming an Olympic weightlifter and starting the television network and just my life. And it was in a book called "You Don't Have to Be Blind to See." And I thought that was it. I'm done. I wrote my book. And then about 8, 10 months later, the publisher calls and said, "Wow, this is selling well, Jim." And I said, "Well, that's what we want." And he said, "Yeah, we're almost ready for your follow-up book." I said, "Well, what is a follow-up book, actually?" He said, "Well, that's the book you come out with next to capitalize on the success of this first book." I said, "You boys should have told me that. I wrote everything I knew in the first book. Somehow I scraped enough together to write Success Secrets of Superachievers, the people I'd interviewed on television for our programs. And I did a book with Steve Forbes called Great American Success Stories, and a few others. And after 6 books, I'd written everything I knew and a few things I only suspected. So when they wanted another book, I figured I got to make up a story. So Michael, who worked for me at that time, was the limo driver. He picked me up at my house, and every day I do something different. I'm totally the ADD as in capitalism. I do something different every day. So he said, "What are we doing today?" I said, "I'm going to write a novel." He said, "What's it about?" I said, "I have no idea. The only thing I have in mind is the first line of the book. I got it in the shower." He was pleased I would recite it to him in the limo instead of the shower. And I said, it says it was my 80th year of life on earth and my 53rd year in the practice of the law that I was to undertake an odyssey that would change my existence forever. He said, well, now it sounds good. I said, yeah, if I can figure out who's talking and what's he talking about, we're going to have something here. And over the next 5 days here in our office, between my meetings and phone calls, I dictated The Ultimate Gift. Never an edit, never a rewrite. And that book spawned a movie trilogy and millions of books and $100 million in gross of books and movies and really changed my ability to do what I feel I'm supposed to be doing in this life. Because I'm convinced, Rick, that if William Shakespeare or the Apostle Paul or Mark Twain were alive today, in addition to, writing books, they'd be making movies, because movies are the most amazing thing. I have stood in arenas of 20,000 people, and I give them an example. I said, okay, Clint Eastwood, go ahead. And you hear 20,000 people say, make my day. Or Dorothy says, Toto, I don't think, and they'll say, we're in Kansas anymore. And I do 4 or 5 of those. And then I point out, none of those movies have been on a screen in 40 years. And you know the line. And they have that kind of impact. So it's been a real blessing for me. And I, as a tribute to Michael and the Limo, which started my first novel, I always play a cameo in all of my movies. And if anybody watches The Ultimate Gift, hey, Garner's good, Brian Dennehy's good, Abigail Breslin is awesome. You see all these people, but there's a little scene near the end with the limo driver.
Yeah.
That's me. And so I've been the limo driver in 4 or 5 films, because when Fox came to me and said, we want you to do a part in this movie, they flew out to Vegas and watched me do an event. They said, Jim, you could be in a movie. I said, why would I want to ruin my own movie, guys? And they said, no, really. And I said, okay, I'll play anything but a blind guy. I will not play a blind guy. And so they said, well, you got the script, pick a part. Well, here's a limo driver with one line. And I figured there's no way he's going to be a blind guy. So I have been the limo driver in all these films. And it has been, and nobody's been seriously injured to date. So we're excited about it.
Yeah, so that's an Easter egg, so to speak, if you will. We've only gotten a little bit into Jim's background, although you've heard some of it sprinkled in as we do here. You mentioned about doing different things every day. I'm a guy who, because I'm a caretaker, there's a pattern. Everything I do every day has a pattern. But then also being in radio and diving and many other things, those other things kind of tend to change. When you get up in the morning, do you have a plan? Do you have a set? How are you approaching that day? Is there an overall goal and then some time left for you? How do you do it?
I wake up extremely early and, I am up. 4 o'clock's the latest I ever get up. I'm usually up a little before that. And I have my routine, although you and your new radio show have greatly impacted it. Because some days I do audiobooks and some days I listen to music. And, I started out as an Olympic weightlifter, but now my workout involves these bands. They're amazing. And it's a great workout. And I was debating, Rick, how it was when we were young, and you're trying to decide how much you're going to lift, and you always want to add more weight and do more reps. Well, you get to our stage in life, you're just trying to hold on at all.
Yes.
Well, I was trying to decide, am I going to do 5 sets of these curls or 6? And I've been wimping out for several weeks. I've only been doing 5. And I was just getting ready to wimp out again. Your show's on. And then I swear, just as if it was on cue, you say, now here's a song that came out of a movie in 1977, and you play the Rocky theme. Well, I defy anybody to hear the Rocky theme on Groovy 105.7 and wimp out in their workout. So now, because of you, I do 6 sets every day. But I have my morning routine that involves my quiet time. I read a book every day. I'm embarrassed to tell, with 10 million books in print and nominated for a Pulitzer Prize, when I could read like you and most of your audience with my eyes, I don't think I ever read a whole book cover to cover. After losing my sight, I was part of an experiment that the Department of Education did to see how fast people could listen to the new compressed digital audio. Well, after the experiment was over, I just kept going. And because of that, I can listen to books at 5 or 6 times speed. So I read a book every day, and becoming a reader made me want to be a writer. So I get up, I have my quiet time, I contemplate my day, I do my workout, I listen to Rick Corey. I do an audiobook. Then Miss Crystal wakes up around 6, and we spend an hour together every morning. We sit and drink our coffee on the deck or in front of the fireplace, depending on the weather. And we have another rule, and we sit and talk for an hour. No TV, no devices, no nothing, and we talk. And and that's part of my morning routine. And that started about 20 years ago when I was burning the candle at both ends. And I came home one day and I told her, hey, that deal I've been working on for a whole year finally came together. And I realized she had no idea where I was starting. And I made up my mind right then, that is never happening to me again. And, I realized my parents lived 3 miles away from me and I hadn't seen them in a couple of months, and that stopped. So from that day forward, I spend an hour every day with Miss Crystal. I called my parents every day till they graduated to heaven, and I had dinner with them every week. And my only regret was it wasn't 2 or 3 times a week. But problems come with lessons, and as the great man said, don't ever let a good crisis go to waste. And so I thought, I am not getting caught up in it. And then I come to work and I do whatever it is I do. I stay out of the way and let some really talented people do their jobs.
For those, and I want to make sure that we're really plain about this. I want people to understand where to find your stuff. For instance, you mentioned the Narrative TV Network, which is such a blessing to people who have their issues, obviously, in many ways. As my daughter is losing her hearing and sight in one eye, I'm more and more involved in understanding these things. And for many of us, we don't get into these things unless they impact our lives. But from that service, tell people how to find your services, especially those.
Well, it was hard when we started. We were on cable TV and had to do our own thing. And then the digital world happened and we were able to take advantage of that. And as we speak today, from the little thing we started here in Tulsa, Oklahoma, all primetime programming on all the major broadcast and cable networks is narrated for blind people. And it's on in your TV, in your home right now. And it doesn't cost anything. The only thing you do is, depending on the model of your TV, or you hit a button called languages or SAP or second audio program or whatever it is. And all of a sudden there's that voice. And it's a voice in between the dialogue. And it's said Rick suddenly walks across the room and peers out the window. And, and it just says what's going on in between the dialogue of the people. So people can hear what they can't see.
It's fantastic. And then, of course, the audiobooks, which have been out for an awfully long time. I know some of the folks who have worked for you and read those in those passages and things, and wonderful people, the Pauls and Susans of the world and those kinds of folks. Quickly, what's on your horizon today before we move on?
Well, as I said, I wrote 6 books last year, and you think you did all the work, and then the publishers want you to get out and hustle these things. And sometimes I wonder with these publishers, okay, I write the books, finish the books, proof the books, send them to you. Now you want me to go sell the thing. What do you guys do? But anyway, I've got to go promote all these. I got a book coming out this month called Millionaire Answers, and then a book, a novel I wrote will be out in the summer called Coach for Life. And then the most exciting one will probably be out at the end of the year. They don't have a date on it yet. But like I said, I started out to write 2 books and they just piled up on me. And actually last fall, I called my publisher and I said, look, I'm sending you the 5th book in what I said would be a 2-book year. And I said, I ain't writing no more. I said, if Mark Twain comes back to life and calls you personally and says he wants to do a book with Jim Stovall, tell him it'll be spring or summer of 25. I ain't writing no more books. But then a friend of mine in Boston that owns a financial firm calls me. He said, did you ever read Steinbeck's book, Travels with Charlie? I said, I was supposed to read it in high school and didn't. He said, I'm sending you the audio book. Do yourself a favor. So I listened to this book and wow, it blew me away. And about 3 in the morning, I wake up, about 30, 40 minutes before I normally would. And I have this idea for a sequel. And the Steinbeck family's been very gracious, and the Steinbeck scholars and everybody. And so I will have a book that's a sequel to Travels with Charlie. It's called Travels with Steinbeck. And writing on the top of John Steinbeck is an exercise in egotism. It's like going to the Louvre in Paris and saying, Leonardo did a good job on that Mona Lisa, but I think he left something out of it. Let me pencil this in right. And, but yeah, those are the big things. And then we're working on a movie here in town. Be my ninth movie. It's based on my novel Will to Win, and we are going to shoot that at Will Rogers High School right here in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And it's one of my they're called homecoming historicals. They all take place at modern day high schools, but the namesake of the school gets involved in some fun ways. And I've done that with President Harry Truman in one season of Hope and Top of the Hill with Napoleon Hill, and now we're working with Will Rogers and the Rogers family, and it's a fun project.
It is a, it's an amazing life, and you've become something that I think all many of us would only aspire to, and especially with all that you've been through, Jim. It's a pleasure having you as a friend. We're going to do these once a month, and this is what we basically started with. Now, I want to tell you, if for those who are watching and listening out there, there's something you'd like to know. There's some advice you'd like. If there's something you would want to hear from Jim, let me know. You can just go to the Groovy line at 918-679-1057, or you can email me directly, rick@groovy1057.com, and then I'll make sure we get those things to Jim. Friend, it's always tremendous. Whatever it is you're doing tomorrow, do it well, and we'll talk again in a month.
And when you play those songs, remember there's some old guy trying to get through his workout, so give us a break. Play a ballad or something.